So, um, I ended the last lecture kind of basically walking into a little bit more of a discussion about the Viking invasions. And so I just kind of want to show you, here's a picture of Europe at the time. Um, if you look, here's Scandinavia, okay? Now remember we saw that was the Swedish Vikings coming here from the east into Kiev. And there's going to be creating modern Russia. So they're coming this way. Vikings attacking here. If you remember them being a part of the Varangians, being the Varangian Guard for the Byzantine Empire, and basically they're attacking, Paris, all the way down here, and they're making it their way into Spain and coming up around this way. And then the British Isles, they're just basically just all over on them, and they leave a tremendous mark on the British Isles. And again, I like to kind of talk about, in terms of Western culture, things that are affecting us living in the United States, and the United States being a byproduct of a colony of the British Empire, right? And Dublin of Ireland was founded by Vikings, okay, mainly as a slave trading center for Irish women in particular, but Irish slaves in general. Then you had them ruling over parts of England, and you had in these islands, the Shetland Islands, the Orkney Islands, the Isle of Man, and on basically Scotland was heavily influenced. Some of the important clans of Scotland possibly were founded by Vikings. The Macleod Clan, by the way, I hate to mention Donald Trump, but Donald Trump's mother is from Scotland, and she was a Macleod. And he has a complicated, controversial legacy in Scotland, as much as he does here in many ways, by the way. But that's a whole other topic. Macleod Clan is a very powerful, important Highlander clan that are a Gaelic speaking, part of the preserving a lot of Celtic culture in Scotland. Their founder may in fact have been a Viking. The Gun Clan also may have been a founder as a Viking. If you look at the Isle of Man, which is not in this picture here, they still do their parliamentary sessions based on in open air tents. It's very odd. You can look at it on YouTube, which comes from a Viking practice, and yet they were, they're a Celtic people. Their language was Manx up until around the 50s. I think is the last time you had that. It's pretty much died out, I believe. But in any case, they've left a huge impact on the British Isles. And they've left a very mixed set of legacies. In the 19th century, Victorian British people were obsessed with the Vikings and romanticized about them. And this is really the first time we get a discussion of the Vikings really even in modern times on any great level. And again, I think it was because the British were colonizing many different parts of the world, and the Viking legacy seemed more like something to celebrate. On the other hand, you have many Irish and Scottish historians who remind everybody, and sometimes English as well, that the Vikings were raping and pillaging their people, and that the legacy is not something to be celebrated in the British Isles. Ultimately, though, their mark there is, was significant. Okay. And then I also want to point out that in terms of Western Europe at the time, I'm not going into, and unfortunately I should have covered this more, but limited, the Magyars coming here from the east, and then we have the Islamic Empire, which we've been, Muslim attacks coming at the same time. So the whole world was in turmoil, like they are. Like it happens to be most times in human history. Are the Vikings worse or better than all of what we've been seeing so far? I'll leave that up to you. Now, let me just go into covering something. I have to go again briefly. I've talked about how Germanic people, like the Celts, were not literate. I mean, the pagan era, and that they didn't leave us big bodies of literature behind. But we know that they had a major oral literary tradition, like all societies, right? When there's not writing, it doesn't mean that people aren't talking about things or having great ideas. It's just that we don't have something to pin them down and for our memory. Because once the people who know those things die, and if those stories aren't passed on, they're lost forever. How sad, right? Like, ugh. Okay. Now, something unique happens. Okay, with you know the Vikings are from the northern parts of the Germanic tribes. So we saw that Germany, Charlemagne came from a Germanic line, and then we saw the destruction of Saxony's pagans. Basically, Christianity was, tearing up the pagan world, Germanic world on the continent. And then you have the Vikings up further north, the Norsemen. And they're going to, able to keep pagan longer. Eventually, as they conquer, they're going to be integrated into the Christian world. In the same way that the Vikings of Sweden went into, to Kiev and started marrying Slavs, and then the Slavs became Christian, and then they just became Slavic and Christian. You're going to see that happen. Normandy of France will be founded by the Norsemen. That's what the word means. And the Norsemen will convert to Christianity, and then they will marry French women and start speaking the French language and lose that Germanic side of their culture. But the Norse stay on longer. And then if you look late in the century, during around the Viking Age, in the 8th century, Iceland was colonized by mainly Vikings from Norway, many times bringing Irish women, sometimes sex slaves, that are going to then bear them children that become important founders of Iceland. And for whatever reason, I mean, Iceland becomes the place in which we basically get almost everything that we think about when it comes to Germanic religion and characters, such as Thor and Thor's hammer, and some of the stories that are important to people interested in these topics. They almost all come out of Iceland. Well, why is that? For one, Iceland converts to Christianity in the year 1000. And in a very interesting way. So Iceland, of course, is the highest north of north can get. Okay, they tell stories about themselves in these books called the Icelandic sagas, which I'm going to talk about here. The sagas are very important. You don't really see anything like this in other world cultures, and I highly encourage reading them. They're fascinating. They're like a reality TV show for the founders of Iceland, or you could call it Viking reality TV show, like put to a novel. They're really stories about mainly Norwegian Vikings telling the story of why they left Norway to colonize Iceland and to get certain land carved for each family, and then the battles and the issues and the sexual drama and just all the dramas that would take place on Iceland between these various Viking families. Okay, and they write about this. They must have passed these on orally for a long time, and then around the 12th century, they put these to writing, and these writings are going to be discussing these events that took place between the 9th, 10th, and 11th centuries. Okay. And so they're talking about their past when they were pagan as Vikings. Later, they discuss the conversion to Christianity and just the issues that were important to them and their families. Okay, really fascinating. And what we find out is that the king of Norway that basically becomes Christian around the year 1000 and says, okay, Iceland is the only one pretty much left in the pagan realm. They got to get with the Christian program. So we're going to put a blockade and isolate Iceland unless they convert to Christianity. And there were Christians there, mainly pagans. They didn't know what to do. They had this thing called the Althing. They'd have like these meeting places for the rich and the powerful. Had a type of democracy, a democratic republic of sorts among elites. Very interesting. And they'd meet at this thing called the Althing. It's like their parliament system. And they basically got together and they said, look, we're going to be starved out if we don't convert to Christianity. And so the pagans and the Christians were there, and everybody's like, what are we going to do? And the pagans agreed, and they said, look, we can't starve. It looks like we're going to have to become Christian. And so by a vote, Iceland becomes Christian in the year 1000 officially. And essentially what they say is, look, we're officially Christian, but whatever you do at home, don't ask, don't tell. So paganism doesn't get eradicated in the way that we saw happening in Germany with Charlemagne and the Saxons. What happens is that people kind of privately do their own thing. And then eventually the church over time is going to try to assert itself more in Iceland, and it'll eventually weed out paganism there. But in that process, it doesn't surprise us that the Icelanders were able to preserve a knowledge and a memory of the pagan past longer than their continental European counterparts. And as they took on writing, then they put all of this to writing. You had this amazing preservation of a history that would have been lost to us and was lost on the rest of the pagan European world. I'm going to do, in the last lecture I'm going to do here on this section, I want to actually go into that discussion of those things, the Icelandic sagas and then the Eddas that I'll be talking about.